Hey, my name is Mark Ray.
And I am Zach Desjardins.
And welcome back to the EdTech Remix. Today we are going to be talking about knowledge constructors. One of the standards of the ISTE student standards, as well as here in Washington State, the Washington State Educational Technology Standards. And I'm very excited about this one.
Excellent.
As a librarian, I've been a librarian all my life, and this one is just like totally my wheelhouse. And our guest today is a superstar librarian that's been just doing some amazing things in this area. So I look forward to having some conversations about that.
Yeah, when I think of knowledge constructor, I think it's one of the standards that goes deepest when you look at student learning, or can go deepest at student learning. In your experience, what pops to mind on?
Well, having been a librarian, I started as a librarian in 1992 at Houck Elementary School here in Vancouver, Washington. And, at the time we had technology like, well, actually we didn't even have some of this stuff. I brought here my cavalcade of old technology. This is the Teaching, Learning, and Technology Interactive Kit from Apple. And the apple is not multicolored, it's not white, it's actually red. And inside this very heavy tome of the future of technology, we have a CD-ROM.
Yes.
Okay, of course, that was pretty revolutionary, because I remember when I was at Houck Elementary, we had a few CD drives connected to computers. We had just a few computers, and the CD drives, we'd have like encyclopedias and such on that. And then, of course, a little bit later came the all-powerful video disc, and of course this is I'm not sure why they chose 12 inches, maybe because records used to be
it's like a record.
Yep, it's a big, huge, monstrous CD-ROM that was theoretically the future of storage content, and
you can hold a lot of data on that big of a disc.
Yeah, you didn't really actually. It's amazing. It was so big, and you compare it to the storage technology. Oh, and then you had the. This was the other thing that was great. This was the barcode reader. So what you would do is you'd go in the book and you'd scan a barcode for a specific chapter, and that would take you to that section of the video disc. And I actually remember when I opened up Discovery Middle School, we spent $20,000 on a multi-volume set of the. It was Encyclopedia of the 20th Century, and it was only like through 1986, which was kind of a strange thing to actually get the 20th Century encyclopedia, but it had a bunch of news footage and images and such, which again now we can find on the internet in a heartbeat. And we bought that, and I don't know that we used it once, but that was, at that time, that was something that we really believed was the future of knowledge construction, because if it was digital, it had to be good.
Sure.
So, but again, I think the technologies have changed. In the past, it was all about going to the library and finding books and magazines and information like that, and the process really hasn't changed much.
No.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to talk with Traci about that. So the standard is students critically curate a variety of resources using digital tools to construct knowledge, produce creative artifacts, and make meaningful learning experiences for themselves and others. So again, this is the only thing that's really significantly different, I think, from some of the past ones, is this idea of constructing knowledge, and this idea of artifacts and kind of being responsible for their own learning experiences. I think it's interesting. In the past, this idea of some of the things that are connected under knowledge constructor, I think, would have been grouped under digital citizens. So like plagiarism, we'll talk a little about plagiarism and fair use and that sort of thing. And that used to actually be part of digital citizenship. And in some frameworks it actually still is. But I really appreciate the fact that ISTE kind of pulled this out and made it its own standard, because it's definitely a big ball of wax.
Yeah, I think the part of the standard that really jumps out to me is at the end, where they are making or creating, hopefully not making and creating learning experiences for themselves. So there's some choice and self-directed learning they have there, but then it goes on, it doesn't stop there, and for others, so they can actually create content to be consumed by other students, schools, teachers.
Yeah, and we talked about that with Sally under one of the other episodes, kind of that idea of empowered learners, and the idea that you have agency and choice and that sort of thing. The other thing too, I think it's interesting about this one that we've talked about before is this idea of shifting from just consumption to creation. So all of these really speak to that. Again, in the past, I mean, the standard itself talks about constructing your own knowledge, and I think that's a critical shift as well.
Well, and I think that concept, the idea of consumption versus creation, is so key when you're looking at integrating technology into a learning experience. So many of those vendors and companies out there that have created a device, especially Apple did a very, very strong job with their iPad and that whole line, the iOS whole line, for consumption. You consume your news there, you consume anything, everything there you can. But it can't and shouldn't stop there. That is also a very, very powerful device, as others are, to create. And I think a lot of times, even working with some of our parents, or even community that aren't in our schools on a daily basis, have sometimes when they have a kind of a disconnect or questions about why are we doing this technology, and we kind of have a conversation around the consumption versus creation and kind of that step forward, and that this iPad is way more than just consuming Netflix on, which it does very well.
Well,
is that key?
So is that do you think that's connected to that fear of screen time?
It can be
linked to that.
Sure, it can be, and I think it's. I think if anything, we're pulling us, our parents, our students, pulling these things from our own experience. So when you buy a device, an iPad, where it might be at home, and they are using that at home, typically you're going to be using it to consume,
right?
And so that's the experience they bring to the schooling experience. But when you use that device to create, to use iMovie, GarageBand, in fact, Apple went through and produced an entire suite called We Create. Because they saw the power in that, and being able to allow students to create and produce these artifacts for themselves and for others to share is very, very powerful.
Cool. Yeah. Well, we've got a perfect guest to kind of help us explore what that knowledge construction looks like. So we'll take a cool little break and bring in our guest.
All right.
Welcome back.
Yeah, and with us here we have Traci Chun. She works here with Vancouver. And why don't you just spend a few minutes talking about yourself, what you do here in Vancouver, and how you're connected to this standard being a knowledge constructor.
Well, I am Traci Chun. I'm the teacher librarian at Skyview High School, and actually my library was the site last year of the state announcement. The state superintendent, Chris Reichdahl, came down, which was a great honor, and announced that the ISTE standards were going to be adopted by the state for EdTech. So, that's obviously a connection I have. I've actually attended the ISTE conference the past 3 years, and it's an amazing experience to interact with librarians and educators and leaders from across the globe, and look at how EdTech is implemented. So Knowledge Constructor, I think, is the perfect place for a library to interject itself into the ISTE standards.
Okay.
Because it's talking about all the things that we're doing in library land with research and inquiry and creation.
But it's not the same as it used to be.
No. In fact, I almost brought my set of encyclopedias with me, but they wouldn't fit in the car.
Oh. Could have just brought one. I could have opened up and kind of sniffed them. And
sniff the old books.
My wife makes jokes of me is when I know something that she doesn't know, she said, "You probably read that volume of the encyclopedia." Because I've admitted that I would go down in the basement and read the encyclopedias. That's why
Explains
I'm such
a lot.
Smart guy, I guess. Anyway, so things have changed. So, as a librarian, you've been now at Skyview for how many years?
This is my 7th year.
But you've been a librarian for
14 years.
Yeah, so you've got a little bit of a historical perspective on this. So what are some of those kind of shifts in kind of knowledge consumption and creation that you've seen over those almost 2 decades?
Well, I actually have a perfect example from this morning. This morning I collaborated and co-taught with our coding teacher, and I was in her classroom. I wasn't even in the library. And they are working on a project with Python code. These are the Coding 2 students. They're using the Hummingbird robotics kits. And the reason why my coding teacher is even aware of the Hummingbird robotics kits is because we had them in the library. We started providing students some opportunities to test and try new things. And so I think that's a great example that librarians are going beyond the walls of the library to collaborate and co-teach. It used to be you would come to the library, you would pull the encyclopedia off the shelf. That was my experience too. Yeah. And now that kids can access things with the click of a button, we really have to kind of change the way that we have library.
I know when we deployed the iPads for the first time in the middle schools under the pilots, the aha moment for me is that, oh my gosh, all of a sudden information literacy, which is kind of connected to this idea of knowledge construction, is more important than it ever has been before, because they don't have to go to the library anymore to search out information and make sense of things, and so they just have the device in front of them. And that was, for many students and teachers, that was the most revolutionary thing associated with getting a device in their hands in the classroom. And so now suddenly, oh my gosh, you don't have a librarian to help you, guide you through that process and such. So
yeah, I think that definitely was the start of it. I think that at least in my building, with the leadership in my building, we really have taken it to a different level, and really looking at consumption versus consuming, and what do we want students to leave what do we want them to leave school with, right? You're going to have some consumption, right? They need to learn those things. But when they go out in the real world, do we want people who can memorize facts and, show that on a piece of paper? Or do we want kids who can take a problem, rethink it, reimagine it, work together, and create something new? I mean, for me personally, I always tell my students, I want you to go out and change the world. And to do that, we need to provide them with the opportunity to practice those skills.
So those skills are, let's start with.
All right, we'll jump into the first indicator for this. So I'll read it, and then if you have any initial thoughts or responses after that. So the first one is this: students plan and employ effective research strategies to locate information and other resources for their intellectual and creative pursuits. How do you see that playing out in your role or in your building?
Well, it's interesting because with Google, I've just been in classrooms right now doing inquiry and research projects, and students don't, they think that they can just go onto Google and get the answer.
Sure.
Which is great.
As opposed to adults where they go to Facebook.
Exactly.
At least the kids.
That's another topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could probably do 2 shows on that topic.
Stay tuned.
I think that really it's the job of the teacher librarian, and actually all educators, to really guide our students down the path of what is, we just had this conversation, with 10th graders in my school about, not everything that you read online is fact, and that anyone can put anything. There are some great, funny websites you can take them to.
Yeah.
So I think media literacy and digital literacy is more important now than ever before. Used to be in my day, it was you worried about people copying from the encyclopedia, and nowadays it's so much larger than that. It's inaccurate information, it's copying, it's copyright violation. I mean, it's just such a large, vast, and this is the world that our kids, this is the only world that they've ever known. So it's really important that we make sure that they have the skills needed to be successful and good citizens when they leave us.
Sure.
Have you been effective in kind of employing, because I think about when I have a question at home, I pull up my phone, which is not working right now because the screen blew up on it, but you just go to your local device and you do that, and I as a librarian, I have a little bit of a process in terms of kind of evaluating those resources. How do you kind of interject effective research strategies into that inquiry cycle? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think just like you said, I think that by showing them inaccurate information on the web and talking to them about research, I was just talking, like I said, to 10th graders this last couple of weeks. I've been going into classrooms, they're doing a research paper, and I actually was with freshmen yesterday, but talking to them about how they research every day in their lives and they don't realize it. And when they go to Google, or they go, to do some just basic, find out what time a movie starts, for example, it's very different than academic research. So I try to really separate the two, and tell them it's okay to go to Google and search for, facts and information if you're, talking with a friend and trying to figure out, when the last time the Trailblazers won the Western Conference Finals. You need that fact. Just, it was before our students were born. But anyway,
2000, by the way. 2000 was the last time that the Blazers made it to the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah. So instead, trying to guide them into, shifting that thinking about that it's academic research and kind of showing them the path. And honestly, for me, it's almost like teaching them how to cheat, because the citations are done for them when they use databases, but I think it's just having those conversations and constantly reminding them and providing them opportunities to practice. I think.
So it's not really enough. I mean, in the old days, we were just happy if people would cite their sources.
Right.
You know, I'm going through all of my old lessons and, you know, kind of weeding through some of those things. And, you know, I had whole lessons on how to cite sources. And that was the battle at that time. It's like, oh, you got to cite your sources, because the sources were moderately credible at that time. I mean, that they came out of the library or, you know, some database or something like that. And now it's not, you know, citing your sources is not even a barrier. You just simply push a button and it automatically does that for you. And you also need to evaluate those sources.
Absolutely.
So that's a huge shift. And that kind of gets to the next one, which is a perfect segue, is 3B, which is students evaluate the accuracy, perspective, credibility, and relevance of information, media, data, and other resources. So, I mean, you know, fake news immediately comes to mind. I've been doing several sessions I was at the California conference for Q. We're going to do one at ISTE on this idea of fake news, and it used to be just something the librarians worried about, and now suddenly everybody is kind of thinking about it and talking about it. So, I mean, how do you address this challenge of fake news in the context of school?
I think also it's not just fake news, because a lot of our students don't really pay attention to quote unquote news. I think a lot of our students, it's really talking to them about social media and about media in general. So, for example, had a conversation with some students the other day about Instagram and celebrities getting paid to endorse things on Instagram.
Influencers.
Yes, influencer.
Right. Yep.
There you go.
Yep.
Or on YouTube.
If you're listening at home, that is a job for the future. If you're an influencer, you'll make a lot of money.
I want to be an influencer and make a lot of money.
You are an influencer, Traci Chun.
So talking to them about they're getting constant, you know, advertisements thrown at them, and they don't realize it's an advertisement.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when we were kids, you know, or at least when we were kids, maybe not young people like Zach, but when we were kids, you knew it was a commercial. You were watching television, the commercial came on, it went off, it went back to your programming, you knew it was a commercial. And now those lines are so blurred that our students can't tell. They don't know what is real and what is fake. And I think we have to show them, and we have to continue that conversation about the technology piece is never going away, right? The device may change, but technology is never going away for these kids. And so we really need to teach them to be active consumers, right, when they're looking at media. So not just compliant, looking through, oh, yes, okay, I believe it, to really, like you were saying, look at the information, look at the source, and really determine how and if it's quality or not, if it's true or not. And obviously a library is a great place to do that, but we need every educator on board. And so that's where the collaboration piece comes in. I know that Shauna at River, for example, at another high school, she's done an amazing whole unit on fake news that she's graciously shared with all of us. But I think it opens the door to collaboration and co-teaching with a lot of teachers.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think that's the other piece that is in the old days when I was a librarian, the librarian could get away with being the only person doing this work, and now it really is incumbent upon all teachers to have that part of the conversation and the training.
Yeah, and I think as access increases, and it has, for students to information, good and bad, I mean, I think that really is a shared work now to carry that piece. It can't exist with one person or in one room. I was interested when you were talking about the commercials. So you're watching a cartoon, and I think this is my own kids. Like my own kids, we watch TV now online, and we don't have to watch commercials.
Right.
You know, so those that doesn't mean marketing doesn't exist. You know, you have product placement, and even to ask young kids why. You know, I think it's getting them to ask the question why. Or being some form of questioning to allow them to engage in that, so there's just not consumption. You know, because you're right, consumption isn't bad in itself. We need information as well, but there is so many little nuances in there that is it takes the entire building, yeah.
And like you're right, it's all over everywhere.
And this standard, actually the first two standards really are mostly about consumption. They talk a little bit about the creation, but it really is about that consumption process. And then the next two really are about that idea of creation.
Okay, so I will jump into the next one. Students curate information and digital resources using a variety of tools and methods to create collections of artifacts that demonstrate meaningful connections or conclusions.
That's the second time we've seen the word artifacts in the standards. They like that word.
They do.
What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, I think that is the beauty of having a one-to-one initiative, the We Learn and the We Create, is our students have different ways of showing their learning.
Sure.
And they have different ways of being engaged and excited about school. I think back to my own school experience at Truman Elementary. It's
Did you have
awesome.
laser discs?
I think
CDs?
maybe. I'm not. That might have been. We had VHS tapes.
Rock and roll.
Maybe Beta.
We got some of those behind us
Yeah.
as well. So if you
There's
need
a few
some-
around, yes.
But I think back in, when I was engaged at school were things that I cared about, things that I thought were going to make a difference, things that I was going to present to a larger audience, right?
Yep.
But also that, that idea that I got to choose and have some choice into what I was creating.
Yeah.
And so I think in terms of curating information from digital resources, now that they have devices, it's easier now, really, for kids to create amazing experiences of learning that showcase what they have done in a kind of a different way. And I think we have to think too is I think a lot of us think of like, oh, it has to be a presentation, right? Or it has to be a speech. It has to be some kind of, but really, if we're asking kids to curate information and create something, it can be something as simple as a different way of taking notes. Yeah. It could be a different way, right, of showcasing their learning, that's meaningful to them.
Yeah.
I have another example of a teacher in our building is using the iPad to create videos for origami. So we have students that they can watch the teacher, they can do the origami, they're good to go, right? Yeah. There's kids that try again. That would be a student like myself. And so what's great is he made videos of himself doing all of the origami lessons. Yeah. Kids have access to them on their iPads. So I had a kid in my library today that was watching the video, pausing it, trying it on paper. Watching, pausing, trying it on paper. He can watch as many times as he wants. The teacher is still available. So if the kid, gets to a point where the video is not helping, they can go to the teacher and ask for help. Sure. But the student is creating something with some guidance and with some supports from the teacher in kind of this blended learning model. And they can take it another step and they can create their own origami after. We have kids that are now creating their own origami videos for like YouTube, but I think we have to kind of think it doesn't have to be this grand scale project. It can be something that's very, very small.
Well, and I think what's really cool about that example is that sure, there's a video and a student has control over that, but you're instilling in them some self-guided learning.
Absolutely.
It isn't do step A, everybody wait. Let's do step B because we're all on the same page all the time. No, not even close, right? So there's some personalization that happens there inherently with the technology in that student. I was thinking of an example that I saw today. I was out at Walnut Grove for a while, and there are 2 5th grade students, and our students don't have access to Google Sites to build a website, but the teacher does. So working with the teacher, these 2 students were creating, I think it was something on watershed. It was science related. I don't really know the content, but those 2 students were so excited. And as you were talking through even the first 2 indicators here, I wonder when the learning is engaging and relevant, like I saw today, will that inherently cause those students to be more thoughtful about what resources they're pulling?
That's interesting idea.
That is an interesting idea. I would hope so.
Yeah.
I would hope that it would translate.
And it was kind of the thought. I mean, I saw that today, and I heard you talking about it, and I'm like, what if I'm a student, what would cause that? And I think I saw that today in those 2 students.
Yeah.
Well, I think the authenticity about the authenticity of the inquiry is also important.
Yeah.
So often we assign students, and I remember back when I was at Skyview years ago, and the topics that were selected, that they had a very limited choice. The kids just weren't engaged in those questions. They weren't excited about it to begin with, and so the whole inquiry process was something that they had to do rather than they wanted to do.
Yep.
And that's the wondering I have too with this one is, do we have to retrain teachers to think differently about the inquiry process and the lessons that they set up?
Yeah.
I think so too. I mean, we still have some teachers, not necessarily on my site, but district-wide, that still assign a research project, and they say, here's the topic, and here are your sources. And I understand, like, maybe at the very beginning stages of research, I understand the thought process. Their quality, their great sources, right? But like you were saying, it takes away that engagement, but it also takes away their ability to start determining whether or not sources are good or bad. So I do think I think most of the times it's just a conversation with teachers, and reminding them that it's a very different world from when we were in school and when we even first started teaching. I've been in this now 20 years, and it's very different. Yeah. And it's okay to change things up, right?
And it continues to change.
And it will and it will only continue to change.
Yeah. So our last standard is kind of relevant based on what we were just talking about. Is 3D. Students build knowledge by actively exploring real-world issues and problems, developing ideas and theories, and pursuing answers and solutions. So again, that's kind of that issue of that authenticity of inquiry is really critical. So are there some examples of things you're doing at Skyview that you've heard of that kind of get to those real-world problems?
I have an older example from a student who created he redesigned a doorstop. I was a recipient of a grant from Digital Promise and HP, and received a 3D printer and a bunch of other really cool technology. And anyways, I had a student who, a custodian came to me and said, here's the problem. We have these doorstops. They keep cracking. They're, several $100s to buy a new one. We only need part of it. Is there any way you could use that fancy 3D printer thing to print a new one? And I said, well, I am sure I can find a student who can do that for you. So I actually had several students who started working on it, and then it ended up lost a little bit of interest and ended up with one student, and he took it and ran with it, and he actually redesigned it so that it's actually a better product. It won't crack. It's a shallower piece. Anyway, 3D printed it, the custodian spray painted it, hung it up, and it's never needed replaced since I think maybe a year and a half ago. But that student took that, and he then used all of his prototypes. He took all of them. He built a portfolio. This is all on his own. This is all on his own. Built a little portfolio, asked me to write up a little thing. He took it, applied for internship at Boeing. He used it to apply for some colleges. And he is really, really proud of it. But it also has kind of ignited this spark in him where he sees that there is tremendous value in looking around your current place, state, and saying, like, what can I fix here? Yeah. So the other day he was saying that he was going to take on chairs, the little pieces, the knobs that fall off the end of chairs.
So annoying. Yeah. Right.
So he was going to tackle that and try and design a better, And so for that kind of thing where you have a custodian who comes with a problem, and it would have been easy to say, oh, yeah, I've got a 3D printer, we can print one, and have the exact same thing and have the same issues. But for this student to kind of take ownership and say, okay, I'm going to fix this, so we don't have to ever, redesign this, and to do all the work that was involved. I mean, it took math, it took measuring, it took a tremendous amount of work. The other thing that's kind of exciting is right now I'm doing some Hummingbird robotics kits with Python students, and they've been doing Python for the full school year, and they've been coding online, but they can't actually see in real life what that code,
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean? So like the person jumps on the screen or whatever. So with these robotics kits, they're actually, the lights are lighting up, the sensors are moving, they're building live robots. So they're getting to...
Not really live, they're not going to attack.
Well, they might. Some of them might.
Androids are.
They're all, yes, they're run by sensors and power. So, you do the little motion sensor and the robot starts moving. But so they're not really tackling real world problems with this particular assignment, but they're seeing their skills and practice like with something that is real and tangible. And so that's really exciting because they're definitely engaged and definitely looking forward to how they could use their coding and the skills to, maybe fix some world problems and world issues.
Closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think I would echo what you just said as what I was thinking, and I know I've been to Traci's library many times, but and she's said this to me, like it's a place where folks can come. You may not, and explore. You may not have experience in coding. You definitely didn't have experience in making a doorstop. That's not a class we offer. But they can come to a space like that where it's safe. They're allowed to try and fail and iterate over and learn. And I think that's so incredibly valuable.
Yeah. So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I'm Mark Ray.
And I'm Zach Desjardins.
And this has been EdTech Remix. See you next time.